We're super excited to be hosting Waqas and discussing a very under-discussed, underserved topic in the context of company building. And we have Shuaib from our side will be hosting the session, moderating the session. Quickly, if you guys can, we definitely request you to turn on the cameras and switch off your audio so that we try to keep this interaction a little bit more bidirectional stuff for us to see who's involved in the discussion and who's not. Quickly, Waqas heads DevRel and community at Snowflake. His team owns the bottoms-up charter there, and they look at everything to win the hearts and minds of application developers, data practitioners, data scientists, etc. Previously, he led the product and marketing and the DevRel team at Dropbox, as well as AWS mobile services. He has a predominant experience in B2B enterprise software companies. We have Shuaib. Shuaib is the co-founder and CEO of ZipStack. It's a data ops platform startup. In his previous role, he was the VP engineering of platforms at Freshworks. For those who don't know, Freshworks is a public company closing possibly with $500 million in revenue this year. In the past, he has co-founded internet startups and has worked for organizations which deal with petabytes of data and billions of requests every hour. With that said, over to you, Waqas. Please take it away.
Yeah. Thanks, Pratish. Hi, everyone. So excited to meet you, and thank you so much for joining it your Saturday morning. So I'm actually going to go through just a few slides to kind of give you an overview of some of the background of what we are doing at Snowflake, and also some of the other companies and the learnings from there. Just a bit of like a start with a small talk, and then kind of really get to like really the crux of things that we have done that has landed us where we are today, including some of the mistakes and some of the things that we thought would not work, who actually surprisingly worked more than the things that we had actually spent more energy in. How we've set up the team now, and then essentially, basically like what's next now, like on this juncture as Snowflake is changing, as the data industry is shifting, like what is next for us and how are we preparing to actually for that future. And then after that, like set up like few overview slides, we'll just open up for Q&A and discussion. That works? So like I said, I think I'm basically going to draw from my experience over the last 10, 15 years now. My first intro to open source developer marketing, developer programs at OpenStack about 10 years ago, it's actually 12 years now, 12 years ago. And OpenStack, for those who don't know, was basically meant to be the sort of like the #2 cloud provider against AWS. It was like a David versus Goliath, and there's a ton of learnings from there, but it was like super exciting to see how this go-to-market motion is still marketing, you're still doing growth, but it's so much different and so distinct from the other motions. And how do you really sort of like, you can't really fit that in with the rest of the marketing machine, it breaks. So it needs its own sort of place. And then things at AWS, when I was at AWS, we were like, I think like 6 or 7 total product marketers with like total 20 services. So for every single thing we used to, for our feature launches and for like our messaging, we used to go to Andy Jassy and he used to read everything. So it was like good times of like how AWS was expanding, but it was only expanding because they identified that builders is the key to that expansion. And it was such a different bet than the rest of the competition there. We'll talk a little bit about Dropbox and then like for the last 4 years of Snowflake. As you can see, like I've also changed and now I'm on the right side. And like my hands are literally full with my twin boys. So yeah, there's also, as a person who also gone through this. So with that, I am, so basically just talking, I'm going to talk about my journey. I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of recent Snowflake journey, but I'm not going to limit to that, also bring in some of the other learnings. But so essentially, like when Snowflake started about 10 years ago, it was all about the sort of like, disrupting the analytics. And we were thinking from the ground up, like founders came from Oracle and they were thinking from the ground up for how to really think about data warehousing, data analytics from in a completely net new way, and leaving all the sort of like the legacy limitation behind, and we're able to obviously do that. And like in this sort of like a red ocean market, Snowflake turned out to be like the #1 leader and completely changed a lot of predictions and expectations. Then around 2018-19, Snowflake made a big, and then the community at that time was sort of like lightweight, because most of the folks that were buying product were IT and BI and line of business type analyst owners, and they were just buying it through sales team. Around 2018-19, that changed to be going after like a much bigger problem of the data cloud with multiple workloads, like data warehousing one to like, the data applications, data engineering, data lake, and there's a bunch. There's like 8 workloads now, and then building out that cloud that is for data, that eliminates the whole data collaboration and sharing problem and data silos problem, and it was the next chapter for the company. And that's where we sort of like came in, and I joined company around 2019, and we were thinking like of builders as it's sort of like a builder plus, like, there's a whole bunch of things happening. There's a top-down selling machine that is working, product works beautifully. Anyone who does a POC is hooked. But then how do you change that to the, how do you sort of bring in that builder motion to it to really complement the main selling machine, which was tops down. And over the last year, we've kind of like grown out and having a much bigger aspiration. So how do we go after and basically disrupt application development on top of the data cloud? And that requires a builder first mindset. And this is a really cool quote that from our CEO, who basically came out the last year or so, which is kind of really put the stake in the ground, that how this audience thinks and why winning their hearts and minds is so important. And this went to the company. So this kind of tells, like, it wasn't like just like, hey, we go after developers because it's cool, and there's something that supports sales or whatnot. It's basically like we really have to double down on the segment. Any questions? Okay, so okay. So like, why do we exist? So I lead the developer relations and community function, and our sort of like overall charter is the sort of business language of what you saw in our CEO's email previously. It was really basically, we empower the data practitioners to really kind of connect with each other, learn and share, really build their futures in Snowflake. So it isn't really like, we're not really focused on like direct revenue and like making them paying customers. It's much broader. And I'll talk about some of the programs that we run that enable these things, and some of the investments that are way more strategic and have a return in multiple years versus like just get people into a quote unquote funnel. They sign up and we send them multiple emails to activate and then to like become a paying customer. That's not the intent. The intent is to really build that mind share, and then have people really build their careers in data. All right, so the folks that we serve are that we go after, basically like we call all practitioners, essentially data practitioners. And the way, at the very simplest level, we divide them as builders and non-builders. So the reason I've been using this builder term than developers, because when you say developers, people think of app developers. Our audience is way broader. There's a lot of data engineers that are building pipelines and stuff. There's a lot of data scientists and machine learning engineers that are building models and building the notebooks and all that other stuff. And then you have architects, DevOps. There's hundreds of startups that come through the startup program, and then finally app developers. We've also seen that there is this sort of like demarcation, as most of you are also familiar with. So is like, there's these people who, depending upon the context, what they're doing, they behave very differently. So you might have a professional developer, professional builder in a company doing 9-to-5 job and using a certain set of tools, but then they go on the weekend and they're hustling, they're tinkering, they're using a completely different set of tools, and then they get hooked and they become such an important champion when we go out and for example, you go out and pitch a tool, and then an engineer basically says, no, I really like this thing open source, I really like this tool that I've been using. So they bring Snowflake to work, and then finally, like, there's a focus on students because they are the next generation of the builders. The next group of folks are non-builders. We also work with them, and a team, and like all of our team members are focused on also making sure that they're successful, and they are also getting the value out of becoming part of the community. And some of them are like IT and DBAs, and then there's many analysts and line of business users. So I'm going to quickly talk about like how we've set up the function and the reason we've set it up like this. So really, I think what I have learned in DevRel and this community growth really is that there's just a lot of this I would say best practices or discussions that we need to be experimenting, we need to be agile. And the challenge in real life, what happens is that then none of the initiatives actually really take off, and you're sort of basically have like 30 things running, and you look back a year later and you see that most of them are like, and you end up not even killing it. They're just like running in a sort of half-assed way, and actually makes the brand look worse than actually didn't exist. So like really having the conviction, and then picking up certain things that you want to double down on and think that those are going to last, to basically show results in longer term, and not like like tracking something on a weekly basis and making decisions based off of that. So like we do a lot of user groups, and we run hundreds of user groups. We have discussion forums that we built our own discussion forums. We saw that Stack Overflow is the place to go, and everyone was hanging out there and responding to questions. So we went there. We have a data superheroes program. We'll talk about in a second how critical your champions are. In fact, like I think the champions program is probably the most, I think, strategic, and the most, it kind of really is the kernel, if you will, of your bottoms of growth, that if you want to really, like create that in a non-salesy way. And then we have like additional programs for builders that are run by the DevRel team. That's like, basically going and talking at conferences, not sponsoring them, doing our own conference, big focus on developer education, and then like really going, hanging out with people where they actually are. So community and some of the other tech ecosystem partners. All right, I've got, I think, Pratyusha, they got like 5 minutes left, so I'm going to move fast. So, so again, like I think getting the principles right for your DevRel or your community strategy has been really instrumental for us. And like I said, it's like a multi-year thing. So essentially, we've basically looked at like, do we want all these people to be paying from the day one, or do we want to be them strong influencers? And I think we're leaning more towards the word of mouth that they create, and the strategic value that these people create is way more than like a few $100s a month type of MRR. So we're basically in for the long haul, thinking of like, so you have to really kind of think about what is your strategy for these developers and builders, and why they are important, and why do they care about your product? So whether it's like, do you help them build better products, or do you help them with go to market, or both, etc. The second learning has been like, how do you inspire and educate them, and not put this form on their face and you try to persuade, because then they'll give you wrong information, wrong phone numbers, and it'll just a wasted effort downstream. We're basically, the thing I talked about, the champions program, like from the day one, thinking about building a community for community is key, and that's the only way you'll scale. So, but that's a high touch thing, right? Like you have to have like relationships with these people who are your extension. But that will then help you to let go of control, essentially, to go to hundreds and thousands of developers and kind of basically go global and everywhere where you don't have full-time employees in. And finally, I touched on this, which is like having this conviction is key. There's this law that I love. It's called Goodhart's law. It basically says when a objective becomes a measure, it stops being an objective. So it's like, like thinking about like, X% increase in adoption, I think is important, but like, that then humans optimize for those numbers, and then you sort of lose the big picture. So I'm going to go move fast. So I'll just talk quickly about this data heroes thing that we started last year and how it's been great. So they're actually, how do we start? So what I'm really proud of is, if you see on the right-hand side, we had our summit, and we flew all of our superheroes to our summit. And they were the ones who were really, we had something called Data Heroes Hub, and they were the ones who were running that hub. They were talking there, they were bringing people there. It was the most buzzing place across all of our user conference. These are the folks who are writing O'Reilly books for behalf of Snowflake. These are people who are running challenges. They are the people who are like really hosting hundreds of our user groups. like, we only have one full-time employee who's running this user group program like 50% of our time, and still we are running these hundreds of user groups in a year. Is through this sort of like the core that has been created. So once you have that, I think then everything else starts lining up, because you can put some swim lanes in place. So your real developer education, you need to really go at, and you basically sort of say, how, and you can track these things, but you really take them with you, and you focus on things that you want to drive. And here's some of the examples of the things we've been able to achieve in just in like through the year, that how with the focus on developer education, with the focus on these things, we picked up some of the programs. These are programs that, by the way, shine. There's a few programs that we started that we were not able to either execute. There's execution problem, and also some of them didn't really work out. For example, Twitch, and there's a few more. I can talk about it in our discussion. So what's next? I think this is my last slide. Listen, what's next really is like, now we're in this juncture that we have this foundation. We basically are growing faster than most of the industry in terms of developer and community program. But then how do we now at this point think really non-incrementally, and really like, there's still, basically how do we, for example, like one of the things we really dealing with is like, how do you go from 100 meetings to 500 meetings? And, that requires a completely different type of mindset, program structure, processes in place, like to reimburse people who are doing these meetups, and like quality control and content. How do we create these data superheroes who we have like really close connection, and then run them into global distributed circles? We run this conference called Build. Can we run dozens and dozens of builds throughout the year? And how do you plan for that? And with like people are coming in, we have to close registrations, etc. But like, what is that? What is it? What is the sort of like the point of diminishing returns, or like what does it actually mean as we run this as a sort of in-person bus tour? The other interesting thing is, and I've been mostly guilty of that, like when you're initially running these developer programs, sometimes you do look at the top of the funnel metrics of like, oh, this is my alarm, which means 30 more seconds or a minute more. So anyway, so you run these programs, and then you feel that, oh, I've got like this much engagement on my X thing, or I've got like people checked out this article and shared this blah, blah. So this is great. And this helps us get a lot of attention, and internally and externally. But how do you then focus on builder success, which is, not like whether they become paying customers or not, were they able to achieve a project, and did they stick with you, and like how many of them actually churned afterwards, and working backwards from there. So truly working backwards from there, and then putting that journey together, or journeys together, is another, like, it's the North Star to focus on that success. And then making them our champions, right? That's the North Star. And then finally, we do have community. Community is pretty instrumental to, and developer relations, pretty instrumental to everything we do. But how can we make this in everything that Snowflake is doing? For example, if customer signs up, do they automatically get a community account? Do they automatically are set up with DevRel workshops? As soon as you sign up with an account, how do you basically every single campaign that you run, and the product roadmap and the feature feedback, the community is the sort of like, is that fabric, or is that thread that is there, is like a backbone that is there. So that's the sort of like, we need to take it to that next level, and that's the aspiration. I do have a couple of slides, but I think that's the sort of like, I'll stop here because I think the slides will probably can answer as you ask questions.
Perfect. No, thanks so much for this, Waqas. I think it's super useful. Audience, based on the session, if you have anything to ask, please use the Slido link ideally. If not, then you can maybe put it in the group chat, and one of us will likely pick it up. Over to you, Shubhav. We already have a bunch of very exciting questions that we stored from everyone who signed up, and we'll be going over some of them now.
Thank you, PC. Waqas, thank you. That was that's a very awesome session. So one of the questions that also I think Apoorv asked a related question regarding how to engage the community and all of that. It's a very related question to that. What are some of the metrics that you would want to track just to figure out, hey, if things are going well, and for example, you track them weekly, monthly, you have some kind of cadence, and how to kind of be a North Star for whatever it is that you're
Got
doing. So what would that be, Waqas?
Yeah, I think so. I'm looking at the is it Approve Garg's question? How do you engage the community? What's
Approve had a similar question. He was asking, hey, how do you engage the community? For example, what was probably the initial hook that got community engaged?
Yeah, I think a lot of that came from and I've got something for the slide. So a lot of that came from the stop sharing from the discussion. So we basically had a lot of folks who were coming in for support, and it was the support team has a very different way of responding to questions than the users talking to each other. So really basically enabling them to talk to users to each other. And for that, we learned that our forums at that time had like really difficult user experience. It was, like the account resets and everything was painful. So we basically made the decision to almost like kill those forums and move to Stack Overflow and really focus, having a moderator focused on making sure that every single question is answered within like few hours of the time was like the charter, and they were, and then that sort of like started. So that's one hook. The other hook was the user groups. So people loved learning about data and also like the modern analytics stack. And Snowflake is in that market position to offer that. And so we brought on a lot of people, a lot of experts, and folks came in. A lot of people came in because they were considering Snowflake, but many came in because they were thinking about building their careers in data or growing their careers in data and so forth. And then those people sort of like, they started writing, it was interesting, Medium blogs about their experience of what they learned, and that sort of went from there.
Right. So, so content created by your audience. I mean, for example, developers, you're saying is also super important, because that seems kind of a very natural thing to
Yeah, and I'm gonna quickly go. Yeah, that's really important. I was gonna actually, you're talking about the metrics. So like, this is a very simple slide. You can like go super scientific on these things, and not the sort of like all the knobs, but this is how we look at some of our objectives across the pillars of community and bottoms up growth, from like awareness to enablement of builders to a success in community. And there's a bunch of things underneath it, from like the new signups to the engagement with the existing resources, like and engagement meaning the quality of engagement. So many times you click on a YouTube video and these are basically the views and stuff. So it's actually like like what happens when there's a link to a or GitHub repo, and do people actually click there and do the stick around, and then all the way go down to certain feature usage and the general community building.
Also makes a lot of sense, because you writing about yourself versus someone else writing about you, huge difference.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
100%.
How does one hire a DevRel team, Waqas? Because this is a top of the funnel itself is very, very tiny. How can one do that?
Yeah, that's painful. That's my pain these days. And I think what I've learned is that there are different types of DevRels, and you don't want to hire the prima donnas, the folks who want to be the talent. There's like many times you hire DevRels and they just want to go to a conference and they want someone to arrange everything for them, and they'll just show up and they'll just talk about a certain use case. So you really want to hire people for the attitude and train them. And that's where I've had. So that's one angle, like having people who are there to do the work, and then be okay if basically like be okay if they're not going to be like a full studio waiting for them to go in and just building out. So having the scrappy thing is super important, and scrappy attitude is important. The other part of that also is having the empathy. So even though you're not like 5 years of developer relations experience from Google and these companies and Meta, but you actually know how developers feel. And it's actually really interesting, because there are just so many small things that many people tend to ignore, but like in that developer experience, they become so frustrating. So having that empathy comes in very intrinsically, and only comes in if you've actually done this work. So that's another attribute to look for. So we've been lucky. We're pretty centrally located for everything else, but for DevRel, we've been able to take exception to hire anywhere. So that's definitely is helpful for us to find people. I do like to have folks in a certain location, like 3 or 4 folks in a certain location on a project, just because I think it just makes things easier from a collaboration perspective. But in this market, it's whatever we get, it really depends.
So I have a question from Amit. I think this is a very interesting question. Builders a target audience because it's easier to use them to extend the boundaries instead of building them yourself? I think he probably means is that, hey, feature definitions and contributions coming from builders themselves. Snowflake is a little bit of a different company. It's proprietary. It's not open source. But what would you have to say to this?
That's an interesting point. I agree with them that there is as we think about builders, we think about builders as customers or builders as quote unquote partners, right? And there just requires a different type of thinking. Like Snowflake has been, I would say, almost all of our effort has been focused on folks that are building on top of the product. So really not extending the product boundaries, rather doing things on top and sort of almost like a bunch of our builders actually, most of them abstract Snowflake as they build, whether it's a customer 360 app or security application or ML models, etc. There is a class of applications that build on Snowflake because of the go-to-market reasons, and part of that is there's different deployment models that we have now where you can actually deploy your application that would run within the customer's data Snowflake account. So, and the benefit there really is that your customer doesn't have to have 500 copies of the data because they have 500 SaaS applications that they use. So you have one copy of the data and multiple apps connected. It's a connected application. So that's a model that is actually going in a little bit into, as which you're alluding to, Amit, having builders build features that we don't have today. It's an interesting area, and it's we haven't focused on that yet from a DevRel perspective. I feel like if we do that, it has to be done the right way, because user experience is developer experience is so critical, and many times things start breaking when you're relying on community to build out these connectors and drivers and other tooling around it.
Right. Also, I think it'll be significantly different for companies that have a primarily proprietary offering versus open source offering.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of our drivers are open source. So
right.
Actually, all of them.
Got that. So this is a very interesting question we have from the audience. It's anonymous. I'm not sure who asked this. Is DevRel important for a company that has a product aimed at devs, but the GTM is enterprise? It's very common, right? For example, you're selling to your GTM motion is really targeting some folks. Basically, folks who are writing the check are different from the audience that you're selling to. Right, but then your devs kind of become your influencers, right? How does that work, Waqas?
Yeah, it's been hard to distinctively focus on one approach there. I think when we started off, that was the intent that the person writing the check will ask someone in the team, and they will say, "Hey, no, I hate this product, and let's change that perception." But over time, I think the last few years, it's completely changed to be, we've seen folks come in from really modern, this new age Web 2, Web 3 companies, and they are the founders and the engineers. And sometimes there's big company principal engineer, like the large SaaS companies, they come in and they just do the self-service, and then they go in and they talk to the SE to say, "I'm ready to sign the contract." So a lot of these people within the companies, like principal engineer or principal architect, also is getting such a buying power now, and they're not really influencers; they're actually buyers because they have the budget too now. That it's becoming such a blurred thing that we can't really, basically go one way or the other. What we don't do, and I don't think I 100% agree we shouldn't be doing, is getting that long tail to just think of them from a direct monetization perspective, and and ignoring them, like ignoring students or ignoring other folks who we know are not going to become paying customers short term, and ignore them. So that's we're not going to be doing. And the thesis behind that is that either they will become buyers eventually, or they will be strong influencers into the buying centers.
I think you spent quite a bit of time talking about that. Hey, don't try to monetize your audience primarily, right? I think that's super important, Waqas. I think there's an interesting question which could throw a light on the strategy that Snowflake has been using. From, again, anonymous, I'm not sure who asked this, but I want to paraphrase this question a little bit, but keep the essence. If you were building the next Snowflake, would you still build it the same way, or would you do something different?
Like Snowflake as a product, would you build it differently?
Or engage with your audience differently from a DevRel perspective?
Oh, yeah. I think that it's a function of some of the product features and how we've gone. Yes, I mean, I think we would have started with some of the developer. I hope that developer tooling would have come in sooner. Some of the APIs and everything would have been available sooner than they came. I think that from a DevRel perspective, my learning is that we were a little bit early on. We were a little bit too gun shy to start going bigger in things, and we spent a lot of time in experimentation. But having that conviction in certain programs and just doubling down on them early on would have taken us to a much faster trajectory than we'd had.
Right, Waqas. I think super important that the engineering team backs up the DevRel team with, for example, high quality documentation and self-service capabilities. So do you find that, hey, you go to you go to your developers, but then you find that some documentation is missing, some self-service capabilities missing? So do you kind of set up a feedback loop with your engineering folks so that this gets better over time?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we don't I'll admit that we don't have this done in a programmatic way yet. We have something called an ideas board that feedback comes through, and then that gets prioritized by user votes and gets channeled to product team. We also do this regular cadence of where we have all of the product team comes in, and we talk to them about what are we listening on Stack Overflow, what are we listening on Twitter, what are developer advocates hearing from other customers. It's a mix of art and science things, so it's not qualitative and quant. So I think it's happening in a sort of ad hoc way. There's a ton we can do there, and that's definitely the sort of the next phase that I talk about, because sort of in this world where users are freely coming in and trying out product, they definitely have a lot more insights in in a lot of the small things that again tend to get ignored in the strategy frameworks. So we could do more there, and we will be doing more there.
Right. So this is not only about engineering, but what you're saying is that, hey, there's product involved as well, right? There could be features that are missing, or you could be hearing feedback about recent features that you've released. So it goes much deeper than just, hey, building an audience for your product. This can be a
100%
powerful feedback loop, is what you're saying.
100%, engineering, product, also support team, right? So there's a bunch of things that are coming through, and then we basically work with support team to make sure that there's maybe a knowledge base article, or there's a way to figure out to get, I'll give it a real life example. One of our top most questions last year was, how do I reset my password when I sign up for Snowflake account? That should be simple, right? People shouldn't be going in and asking this question on Stack Overflow and all these places. So this obviously is a very simple one, but just getting those trends and making sure that there's some way for support. So they're not going in and opening up support tickets from community website. Yeah.
Right.
That's, by the way, another example, sorry to interrupt you, of how your metrics can work against you. So this was happening because, and the only way folks can get access to support is through the community website. So you're basically saying, my engagement in community is much higher, but it's actually these people are going into doing something really low value, and that's hurting their experience.
Right. So it's a negative engagement, right? So this reminds me of one of the top questions ever on Stack Overflow is, how do I get out of the Vim editor, right? So, maybe something like that,
That's right.
You don't want that happening.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So there's a PC, did you say something? Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought somebody said something. What is the right time DevRel might be required, Waqas?
Yeah, I think it really depends. Like if you're building like a B2C startup, I'm assuming you're talking about a B2B builder-oriented startup, right? And it really depends like what is your sort of like what you're solving for, right? But then like the general answer that I'll give is that I think as you start DevRel, optimize for folks who can compound their impact and not be the sole warrior, whether they're solving for like just the docs, like writing few docs or like writing vlogs or conferences. You really want someone who can be that compounding, that 10x person into the team. And once you bring them in, that changes the whole dynamic. And they can bring in the other external people. They'll bring in engineers to create things, and they usually take the back seat. And right. They're like working behind the scenes, but they're orchestrating things. And you will see, like this sort of like this program created. And you can only, most people can only start like one or two people, right? So how do you start with that person who has half program management jobs and half technical jobs, and then this mindset to really do this thing? So like I think the timing varies. I think that bringing on the developer education person is always my first hire, and then you go from there.
So can technical writers kind of turn into DevRel folks, Waqas? Is that something you've seen happen?
I haven't had success with that, to be honest, and I've only tried a few times. I've only tried it 2 times. It's been tough just because you have to, again, that developer empathy is crucial versus the accuracy of content, right? I think they tend to be more on the accuracy of content, and then so like the content has to be educational, but also has to be inspiring and exciting, right? So how do you make that so people actually care about it? So yeah.
No, I think this company is built on really good documentation, right? For instance, Stripe is something people really talk about all the time, right? For example, they even made the Mark Doc their system open source recently. The documentation system, Stripe made it open source. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Awesome. So now this is a very interesting question. How different is DevRel for an application developer versus a data scientist? Because they have different trigger points. So for example, within DevRel, you may have for example, different audience, right? And there could be nuances there. So, but you are a single team. So how do you folks go about?
Yeah. By the way, before I respond, I saw Amit's comment that I love DigitalOcean. I think they've set a completely different bar for people. And anytime I'm searching for something, DigitalOcean's article is always the first one. And it's actually very to the point. And it's not a doc, right? It's actually a tutorial style thing that you can actually follow. So yes, 100%. And we do aspire, we do look at them from a content and tutorial perspective as the North Star. So to answer your question about the data scientist different than app developers, yes, 100%. What we learned that we need to work on, or we're doing, is that have a separate set of developer advocates that were data scientists and machine learning engineers before. So we've hired some folks who've done actually PhD in machine learning, and they've been practitioners though before, not academics. And all they think about is, you could bring them in as like two sides of the extreme. One is the sort of like, the ones who are building on the model training and model building, etc., like working in TensorFlow and PyTorch of the world, or the ones who are working on, who have the data engineering side of like data cleansing, data transformation, make sure the data, like the models are enabled to be built. So I think like that's sort of like the distinction and we have to cover both sides. So it requires its own skill set. And I agree that you can't have an app developer do this, different type of skill set.
Awesome.
But the vehicles they use are the same. So we talked about a little bit of the programs, right? So we're not going to have like 10 programs for data scientists. Like we will have this user group program. There will be meetups with PyTorch, for example. We've done with PyTorch or with TensorFlow. We will do that, but using the same scaled programs.
Sure.
So they leverage the scaled programs and have the efficiencies. And then same as with the quick starts and YouTube, etc. We have.
Makes sense, Waqas. Pratish, we have about 7.5 minutes left.
I think we can go on. We can try to wrap up the questions that we already have, and in case we still have some time for ad hoc questions, we can possibly take that. Let's go over the ones that we already have.
Awesome. We could do that. I see there's a interesting question regarding partnerships. So how important is the role of partnerships for a product like Snowflake? How does DevRel function enable that? So
that's critical. And when we started DevRel at Snowflake about 4 years ago, Snowflake was still this transitioning from a sort of like almost like builder plus to like weak builder presence. So it was crucial for us. Like if we had done like our own event at that time, we probably had like, a bunch of BI people show up, right? Not the app developers. So like it was crucial to really basically be on the shoulders of those giants. And like, I think, so DevRel sort of basically drove this initiative to bring on the tech, what we call dev-oriented partners. So we brought on partners like, like Confluent or like, whether it's DBT, which is data engineering, but like, those like Airflow, those partners that have a lot of that bottoms up presence, and we become part of that. So that's like, there's one side of that is like, how do you, the sort of mind share and community activation. And for that reasons, partners are important. Obviously, the other reason is the developer experience. And, we work with, for example, Anaconda for like, package management, and like all builders use it, or like scikit-learn, which is a library. And, like there's no company behind it, but like there's some really popular libraries that you have to, and project you work with. We, working with the Iceberg now. We're working Python Software Foundation. So it's just like a gamut, not just commercial partnerships, but also some of the open source or foundation partnerships are critical for us from a developer experience perspective, from the sort of builder mindshare and presence perspective, as well as education perspective. So super crucial. And DevRel has been the place that has really been pushing the direction of our partner team in that place.
Right. So continuing on that theme, Waqas, so I'll take some example. Let's say, for example, DBT, right? So do you have like co-created content, or you have, how exactly,
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes all the way to like, we have like things like labs that are virtual, and as like the 90-minute lab of like using DBT and Snowflake together, and that's probably one of the most popular labs that we do. We have a ton of Medium blogs together. Our evangelists are constantly in touch, and they sort of like do these meetups together. One of our we're speaking at DBT's conference next week or this week at Coalesce. So it's like a big conference. We're speaking there. So yeah, so it's a combination of things.
Awesome. So how important are podcasts becoming in DevRel?
I don't know, man. I think that everyone has a podcast, but I do feel that podcasts done right are definitely a huge upside. So my thinking is, and we're not doing any podcast for DevRel. We have a Snowflake podcast that is more for like, Instacart's CIO talks about why they chose Snowflake. It's a very different enterprisey feel or reasons. Like, I think from my perspective, like I would like to be to embed more in the existing podcasts, such as Software Engineering Daily, etc., that we can either be, like we have our product folks go and speak there, but there's also like in past I've done sponsorships of those podcasts, and developers do have ad blockers, but they love the podcasts. So ads. So like I think there's definitely an opportunity there.
Yeah, I think Changelog is doing a really good job. I think they have a huge audience. Also, Tristan Handy runs his DBT, right? They run a very interesting podcast as well. I think they have quite a bit of
Yeah.
Awesome.
He's really good.
So you folks are still pondering whether you folks want to go into that. That's what I understand.
Yeah, I think it's that line of like, only pick things that are like really going to go bigger versus some of those small things. So that's I think it'll pass this test, but that's the only reason that we haven't really jumped in yet.
Got that. Awesome. I think pretty much. I think pretty much we are done. There's one question I think before two actually. So do you find any difference between this from Nimish? Do you find any difference between folks who are from startups, developers who are from startups versus developers who are from large enterprises? Do you kind of try to differentiate these folks and,
We used to, and I think there used to be the world where there was that line, but I've been becoming more and more convinced that it's just the context of the same person is basically working 9 to 5 at I don't know, Home Depot or some old school company, and then they go in the evening and they're building the next Web3 startup, whatever, right? So they just completely change their mindset and how they work and the thing. So I think I was a big until a couple of years ago, we used to have this sort of this enterprise developer, this sort of boring persona who I think it was there was a blog that someone had wrote a while back, the silent majority. They don't really talk much, but they don't blog about things. They're just doing their job 9 to 5. But I think that's all blurring now. So
right.
No, I think to answer your question, I think our strong conviction is that I think these people do care about security, governance, and certain features, and we need to talk about them more. And that's honestly been our differentiator too. But at the same time, the whole developer experience, we basically be the same in the documentation, the tutorials, and the events experience, and everything should be the same.
Makes sense, Waqas. So we are almost out of time. Before you go, are there any resources you would recommend? How do you keep abreast of what's going on in the DevRel world?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer there. I think a lot of that is just the folks who are I'm old, as you can see. I've been from my 2003 to 2020. So I've worked with people that it's good. It's always good to just brainstorm the best practices and the landmines with them. And just by speaking at event like this, there's an event happening there's a panel happening a couple of weeks ago that I'm speaking. So you get to meet a lot of people there, and then they're all pretty much dealing with the same sort of scenarios and challenges. They typically are how do you measure success? How do you hire people? How do you convince internally for resources? Stuff like that. Right? So there's some common themes there, but just networking with some of those folks.
So so during COVID, Waqas, so did you folks kind of have to really rethink? Oh my God, the in-person events are gone, and did you folks have to rethink?
You know what? It's an interesting story. I know we're over time. It's interesting because my user group lead hire started on March 1st in 2020. So she came on board to build out this program and get Meetup.com subscription done. We brought on this tool for running hundreds of in-person meetings, and then COVID happened. But what was really interesting is that the program did not stop. It actually started getting more people coming in. We had to focus on content more, obviously, but maybe the function of people also having more time to hop onto these things and they don't have to drive. But I didn't think that. I thought that a program would have to pause the program because a lot of people show up to meetups for pizza and beer too, right? So so that wasn't the driver. But no, I think we really actually scaled. It's actually helped the program scale and also focus more on the content.
Got that.
But yeah, now we're going to go hybrid. So we'll have a bunch of things that we'll still do virtually, and then start going back to running in-person events until the next variant.
So Waqas, the couple of things, right? These in-person events or these kind of virtual meetups, those are some things that you need to keep doing as well. But there's also the other aspect of evergreen content, right? How do I change how do I grant permission to a MySQL user? It's a query that will bring up a DigitalOcean article, right? So that is one thing that you continue to do. But then again, you also do events and stuff like that, right? Apart from content and events, is there anything else that we need to think of as far as DevRel is concerned?
In terms of DevRel tactics, there's a long list. I think the things that basically there's obviously the events are big. You need to do a lot of content that is, and then content takes its own. It has its own forks, right? So you basically have a lot of YouTube videos to blogs to tutorials to docs and reference architecture. So there's a class of its white papers, a class of its own, and sort of its own ocean of things you can do. We also do a lot of sample applications and demo apps to get people going with the product. So we have like our own, obviously there's official repo or org, then there is a Snowflake Labs that DevRel runs that basically is for community by community. So, you're the people who are just creating, for example, someone just created a Django connector and they want to contribute or, etc. So that lives there. So, and then DevRels create a lot of content to make sure that people have this easy runway into embedding Snowflake in their product. So that sample applications are crucial. Running the discussions and making sure the discussions most of the discussions are answered by community. So enabling that and providing that experience is critical. And then finally, I think the net of all of these things comes back to this sort of like promise, or like the thing that we strive for is like, there's these users who will come for the product, but they'll stay for the community.
Right.
So like, how do you enable that is like, like we're playing with things like the certificates to like AMAs that we could do in our places to like, a lot of these things that will basically bring people back, not just for they're looking for support or they're stuck somewhere. So right. there's a bunch of, and then there's like this community tactics of like working with some truly developer oriented companies and, right. and sort of like cross-pollinating both sides.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that's very, very insightful, Waqas. So there's one question from Amit. It's an interesting question, comparing DevRel folks with product managers. So
in terms of evolution, strong argument both said how useful they are in absence of data. You see a chance of DevRel compared, meaning that like how they like which ones
mainly
which ones
about
are
Waqar, mainly about, yeah. I mean, in terms of direct correlation, right? I mean, like how do you correlate product managers' contribution directly to the speed or velocity, right? Similarly, right, DevRel was also making direct contribution to bottom lines, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, in absence of really direct metrics, right, or analytics, right? At times, people can saying, "Hey, it is not useful," right?
Yeah,
it is useful, but maybe for a different size or a stage, and people start applying it left, right, and center, and then they say it's not useful. So, I mean, that's what I'm trying to get to in terms of career or evaluation, right? How do they compare? So,
yeah, I think we have hired, or we've discussions of hiring a few folks that have been PM product managers, and some of that is great. It really depends on like, I think the company they were, I 100% agree. They were at the startup. They were doing a bunch of things that were, actually interacting with customers directly, and they were getting the feedback. And they're used to taking action based off of this sort of like, again, I'm repeating myself, like this empathy for the end user, which is a builder, and they get that, and they actually do, they actually code and all that. So those people are great. I think there's a spectrum. Then there's like this MBA product manager who is more on the, like the strategic framework and things, and they sort of like, that's overlap with DevRel. And what we tend to do usually with how we work with the PM team is we're lucky to have the PM team that has been both the users of product, and they come from a technical background, they know their audiences. So what we really basically do is that we bring in that like direct quote, or we bring in like, someone talking about this on Hacker News, etc., and basically say, here's like, or Stack Overflow, say these are like, these are the top 10 topics. Let's go and fix them. And here's the fix. Sometimes the fix is don't build a product feature. We'd rather have someone who wants to contribute this to us, to our open source stuff. And, and sometimes the answer is that we should respond to the user and get more feedback and bring them in. So did I answer your question?
Sure, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
I guess that was pretty much the bulk of the discussion that we had. I think we'll just open up the floor so we still have a few more minutes on the invite if people are having a good time. I mean, I'm pretty sure all of us are on the organizing team. We're really enjoying, and unless it's too late for Waqas, we might have few more minutes
sure.
for some, on the live ad hoc questions that have come from the audience that you did not discuss or could not discuss. So please feel free to shoot them. I have one in the list which we could not go over, but I'll start with that. So Waqas, how does DevRel scale with the size of a company, especially as the percentage of revenue that comes with a bottoms-up motion is reducing as the company starts focusing on slightly more enterprisey customers?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously we don't use the revenue as the sort of like factor in terms of scaling the team. I think that like the DevRel efforts will contribute to revenue 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line, and it'll be much more essentially it'll be much more higher in terms of the amount of the impact there. So we typically tend to look at really, I think it comes back to some of that is your conviction, some of that is showing results of certain types of customers who've been able to be very successful with Snowflake because they were able to use certain resources, and crystallizing those examples is like tangibly is the most important thing. And then I think I think your company essentially either buys into going after developer or not. So like I showed you our CEO's quote, he's definitely bought in, and he's the conviction that's the right thing to do. So that makes things easier. If you're in a place where you're basically trying to convince the team that why you should focus on developers, then I think they would rather end up becoming sales engineers. And I think it's just basically a very it's just a difficult proposition to change. So I would rather not look at the revenue growth, or look at the number of customers that you're increasing, and then increase the number of customers, types of customers that you're bringing in, and how many practitioners that you have, and use that as a proxy. But ultimately, it comes down to really showcasing that there's success stories with just 2 resources. Imagine if we can 10x that.
Sure. Anyone else has any questions that they would like to maybe discuss before we break off the session? Please feel free to unmute yourself and maybe ask. If not, then I think thanks everyone for showing up. It was really amazing listening and learning from Waqas and Shubham. Thanks for moderating, and thanks everyone for showing up. I mean, I know it's a Saturday for many of us in India. It's a festivity. So really, really thankful to everyone for showing up.